every time you say yes to somebody else, you say no to your husband. I don't want to get to Judgment Day and God to go, hey, great ministry, well done, chick, but what happened to your husband and family? What happened there?
Hey everyone, welcome to the Stepping Out series, a podcast all about ordinary people just like you and me who have stepped out into the extraordinary despite the odds. My name's Anna Gray, and I'll be your host today. And my sincere hope is as you listen today, that you be both inspired and equipped to step out into the call of God on your life. I have a very special friend and guest here today, Susan Smith. She was my counselor when I was back in Sydney. Very, very dear person to my heart. Susan, thank you so much for being on. I think I've said to many, there's a couple pivotal people in my life who I owe a lot to, and I think you're one of them.
Thank you so much. That's always very humbling to hear.
Yeah, but I do really mean that you've helped me through a lot of tough stuff, and I know every person who's listening today, you're gonna love hearing all the wisdom that Susan has to share. So really good to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great. Hey, so I want to in this podcast, I kind of want to like split it up into two parts. First part is I actually love to dive into your story personally, and then after that, I have a couple questions for you so we can glean off your wisdom. But Susan, could you just firstly, why don't you just tell us about yourself, what you do, and then I'll ask you a couple questions from there.
Okay, well, my name's Susan Smith. We've already covered that part. I am in a post formal ministry period of my career, if you like. Though I am delighted to say that God still brings plenty of his work, and it is the work that I find most satisfying. I am both a professional and personal coach, and I also still offer counselling. So being a person-centred counsellor and coach, I'm looking to help people rediscover, define their life priorities and the legacy that they would like to lead. So it's getting back to really trying to reduce the amount of white noise and people talking into your life and get back to listening to the still voice within you that is often the best guide. So I've been married for 40 years this year. I have 2 adult children.
Congratulations.
Yep. Not a bad innings. I remember actually turning 40 and thinking, okay, you're credible. You've turned 40 and you've been married 20 years. So I don't know what I think at this time, but anyway, there we are. So a firm believer and have been a believer for 30 years now. It's the governing light through all ups and downs. There is no doubt about that. And the good thing about hardship is that it creates an intimacy and a strength with our Lord, which I really am so grateful for.
So
Don't
much
know
we
if
could
that's
dive
what
into
you were
there.
looking for.
No, that was brilliant. You had so many little nuggets there. I was ready to dive into it, but I'm going to try my best to stay focused right now. I want to know, take us back to the early days of Susan as she's thinking about getting into psychology. What was that process like? Because who we're really talking to today is people who don't feel like they have what it takes, right? And people who haven't necessarily taken the courage to step out into whatever that area is that they feel like God's calling them to. And so I'd love to hear your story and what was your journey like in becoming a psychologist and getting involved with Hillsong College, where both of us met, and moving into the period where you're at now.
I think where my journey started was not in psychology. It was actually in the Bible and the wisdom that salvation offers us in our identity. I think I learnt a key thing off Townsend Cloud, and anybody who knows me knows I'm a Townsend Cloud Cloud fan.
Yes.
They started out as Christians and became, they got to a place where they thought this isn't the answer for people. And so they both went to psychology school and became psychologists and then doctors in psychology, and went into practice and found that that wasn't the answer either. And what these two gentlemen discovered, which they really unpack in a book called Changes That Heal, is that truth and time, under the if you like, the roof of grace, is actually what heals people. So it's that combination of practical truths, chaplaincy, practical truths from the Bible, things like search for life, great basis for your identity as a person, and then on from that using psychology, and particularly psychology slash sociology. I did two majors because it's important to understand, and particularly if we look at it in the Hillsong College context, if I take a nice young man from Canada and I stick him into a college in Sydney, Australia, what am I likely to do to him in terms of culture and in terms of his personal sociology? A lot of times we think that there's something wrong with our mental health, and oftentimes it's a cultural response or it's a response to the sociology that we don't understand. So to me, it was about having a holistic offering to help people understand that they really were okay most of the time. Working in a college of the age group of 18 to 25, most of the time, sadly, that's where mental health turns up in young adulthood. So it was really important to have that basis to be able to understand what was going on for the person and help them understand. Not label, not blame, not downgrade, but understanding. How do you go to the Lord asking for help if you're not actually aware of what you're asking for help in? It's a bit of a blanket, Lord, fix me. And when he doesn't, then we become hurt and disillusioned, if that makes any sense.
So you were talking about how some of the stuff that we may label as mental health, it could actually just be adjustment. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
How do you make the distinction?
Usually when it's mental health, it follows a specific set of behaviours and a set of symptoms. Um, you know, quite often people think, for instance, that they'd arrived to college, or even when you arrived home from being here, that about 6 months after you get home or get anywhere in the world, that you, or even join a new organisation, that the culture shock is largely going to be over. However, experts know that culture actually and culture shock lasts for about 3 or 4 years.
Oh, wow.
So in point of actual fact, by the time you were finishing your undergrad at college, that's when you were starting to settle in and really understand your environment. So some people respond not being able to cope to the adjustment with mental health symptoms. And usually that's about them not having enough tools in their toolbox to know what to do in order to adjust to the situation. So most of the time we tried to grab mental health fairly early on so that it didn't become a big roadblock. It became a bit of a speed hump that you had to get over. Weren't always successful with that, but that was the goal. So oftentimes your response to your environment you can have some depression symptoms or you can have some anxiety symptoms, but that's because your body's going, I'm not coping, I don't understand, and I don't know how to respond to what's going on, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So what tools, you said it could be a lack of tools in your toolbox. What tools did you give to people to help them adjust at those points?
Well, there's a lot of chat these days about wellness, and quite often people they dump their coping mechanisms, which are not necessarily successful coping mechanisms, which are not necessarily known to them as coping mechanisms. So they stop playing their guitar, they stop going for a walk, they stop doing their go to bed rituals that they've had in place for the last 20 years because they're thinking they need to be different. So rather than keeping up with the things that they used to do to fill their tank and make themselves feel good and then adding to them, they start to dump things. So for some of your listeners who are at uni, they may have gone into shared housing. So they've started to stay up late, play games with their friends, watch television, eat the wrong thing. Their digestive system is not working well. So you start to see this unpacking of not looking after yourself. And most 18 to 25-year-olds think they're invincible. They think that the system will just work, and it doesn't. So it's getting back to, okay, what used to work for you and what can we add to that to help you? If this is the life scenario at the moment and it's moving forward and waiting for it to settle down and make sense, how do I help my body be at its best so that it can cope well? And most of the time, a key thing for Christians is they do it sober.
Right.
Right. There's no booze, there's no drugs, there's, not supposed to be cigarette smoking or sexual behaviour. So they're really at a loss to, how do I fix this and how do I make the pain go away and how do I do it sober? It's probably where most Christians' coffee addictions came from. It's all we got left.
That's right. I think that's I think it's actually fascinating because it's true, right? I think even there's a lot of immigrants that come to Canada, right? And part of our church, we have a lot of new people coming in, and you actually see a lot of people being quite tough on themselves when they move. They're just almost a sense of like, I've been here for 2 months. Why am I not over this already? Right? Like, why am I not? I should have been adjusted. Like everything should be fine. Like I'm okay, and like really pushing through. But I love what you're saying in the sense of actually recognizing that it actually takes a good amount of time to adjust, especially right. Like we've never had such a globalized world before, right? When like in the last since I was 18 when I came to Sydney. I was in Sydney for 4.5 years, moved to San Francisco for about 3 years, and moved here 2 years ago. And I don't think so that level of travel and move has been such a norm. And I think it's so true, right? Like having an expectation, like it may be hard, and there are going to be really tough parts about it, and actually giving yourself the grace to be like, okay, it's actually going to be okay. Take the time that you need. And I love that how you're talking about doing all you can to keep yourself healthy so that you can adjust to this situation.
Well, oftentimes we make it worse for ourselves when we try to control, when we try to maintain our brand, if you like. Oh, Susan, she's all together, she's okay. So trying to maintain that external brand and have people believe that everything is okay here is unhelpful. It's the more pressure you place on yourself to act normal, usually the worse it is. And it just needs to be, and not with everyone, but there needs to be a certain level of understanding that this is going to take some time to adjust. I want this is good. And even with things when you don't want the adjustment, it's really just about being kind and understanding it's going to take time.
Wow. So for you, your story in going into psychology and getting involved in this, what were some personal, like why did you want to get into this space? Do you feel like God kind of almost pressed it on your heart, or was it a desire you had since you were young?
I believe, gifts are there, redeemed, unredeemed,
Right.
and I've always been someone that people has asked for help from. As a banker in another life, I I was often given staff who were being performance managed, and was successful in turning those people around and helping them be productive, happy members of our banking institution at the time. So I've always done that, and my mother before me did that. I have this belief, it's a personal belief, that our calling often comes down through the generations. It's part of our tribal anointing, if you like. My heart is for the fringe dweller, for the little people that are ashamed of who they are on the corner edges of the church, that need some love and some encouragement to come in and be part of the church. I've always looked for the lost little lamb. My boss used to say that, and typical of Pentecostal leadership, an A-type, fairly driven towards, and thank God, if I was the senior pastor, there'd be 36 of us in a room all caring for each other. We need fairly driven people, and he would be at the front of the herd. And he did a sermon once about the importance of working the rear and the sides of the herd. And oftentimes our leadership are so focused on where they're going and what they're doing, and their personality type does not equip them to go, oh, I'm sorry, is everyone having trouble keeping up with me? I best adjust. Right. So it's up to the rear guard shepherds to keep everyone together and moving forward at, what is a slower pace, but nevertheless keeping up. So it's really about, I had two calls. When I came, I wanted to reduce the backsliding rate out of Hillsong College, because people would oftentimes be unable to take home with them what they'd learned and practice it back in the world where things were not as ideal as they were in Hillsong College. And the other thing was to see the invisible. So I really wanted to make sure that everyone, to a level they were comfortable and asked for, that they were seen. And that's really what I was trying to achieve, is just see people.
Hey, I hope you're getting a ton of value from this podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, would you like and subscribe? If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, would you rate, review, and share this podcast with your friends? It would mean the world to me, and it helps the word get out. Now back to the show. That's amazing. I remember one piece of advice you gave us before we left. You said, if you're going, I ended up at one of our Hillsong campuses in San Francisco, but you said, if you're going to a new environment, just sit on your hands for 6 months and then choose where you want to be. And I thought that was advice that was definitely not taken by a lot of people, but I think it was some brilliant piece of wisdom, because it does take time to adjust.
Well, oftentimes church is a little dysfunctional in that respect, is that we bond around do. And quite often people don't necessarily feel like they've been seen for who they are, but rather what they can do. And so I think it's really important to come in and join a church and make friends, be accepted for being you, and then certainly I believe in service, absolutely. But it's something that should come secondary to being accepted for who.
Brilliant. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I'm sure with a lot of students, you've had the conversation about, what is my calling? What am I called to? What's your take on that? Because I feel like you probably wouldn't go along with what's more mainstream.
I think students always came for three things, and this is something I learned from Henry Newen when he was a book that he wrote when he was looking after people at Harvard. And Henry Newen talked about students coming to college, whether it be Hillsong College, Harvard, or whether they were going for three things. They were looking for their calling. So they were looking for God to reach out and let them know what it is that he would like for them to do. there was another thing they desired, and that was chastity. They were looking to be able to control the body and the desires that were normal for a human being, particularly a sexual human being. But, these are the things young people have got to apply a fair bit of energy to getting them into a place where they're not building shame within themselves, where they actually feel that they are worthy of being called Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that they were after is, how do I do stuff? So when my senior pastor asked me to go off and do a task, do I know how to do that? So one of the things I like about training schools is that it's practical as well as you're being taught theology. However, I believe that theology always needs to be filtered through your own personal doctrine. It should not be just swallowed. We have a responsibility to be thinking about what we're accepting and what we're forming as our own personal doctrine. In terms of what should people be doing, I think recent history in church, and I'm talking big C church, people need to be putting Christ first. And that's where we need to get back to that. I've never had to look for work for God. God has always brought work to me. I've never had to look for it. I suppose what people want is the rock star ministries, and pastoral care and chaplaincy is not considered a rock star ministry, where I do consider it a rock star ministry. Even when I was recruiting new chaplains, new psychologists, new counsellors, I was looking for dynamic leaders, because I think some of the time my kind were not given permission to be dynamic. They had to be demure and stand to the side and not roll their sleeves up and get involved, if that makes any sense. To some degree, you're not doing your job properly unless someone is arguing with you or coming up against you. If you're going to be an influencer, regardless of what section of the church you're in, and quite frankly, standing in a room, whether you've got a ministry or not, you should be, to a certain extent, and this is a controversial thing to say, you should be controversial. You should be buffeting. Iron sharpens iron. This is not a polite exchange, if that makes any sense. It doesn't mean you're combative. It doesn't mean you're argumentative. It just means that you are a passionate contributor, regardless of where you are. And I think hopefully the church moving forward will be able to understand that it is important to place people where they feel called. It's not, I know that you feel called to evangelism, but I'd like you to run kids ministry. It just doesn't work.
Do you think there's any space for that?
I think there needs to be space for that. I think in order for a person to feel fulfilled, there needs to be an identity of, you actually know what you're called to. And if I'm trying to turn a square into a circle, I'm going to create a relationship with that person that is not going to be best practice for church. They're going to become resentful. I'm going to lose that dynamic force that is within them that God has given them if I try to turn a square into a circle. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you know what? That, to be honest, that's tough for me, because I think I've always taken the approach of, I'm going to go where the need is, even though I may not necessarily, I trust God to redeem my life, right? And I trust God
Of
that He
course.
does know the call of God, that He does know the desires that are in my heart, that what I want to do and whatnot. So do you think there's a space and a time where we need to go where the need is and trust God to maneuver where we eventually need to be? Or do you feel like us as believers, we need to just be strong, courageous, say where we want to be, say the place we would want to serve? And do you get what I mean?
So if we use the Apostle Paul as an example,
Mm.
Did the Holy Spirit try to change Paul, or did Paul get moved around to places that needed Paul?
I think move Paul around to places.
Yeah.
Mm.
Have a look at people like Joseph Prince, who, like him or don't like him, called to Singapore because
Mm-hmm.
he spoke the opposite of what Singapore is about.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking grace, which
Mm-hmm.
is the opposite of what Singapore is about. Singapore is about status and money and
Mm-hmm.
being somebody through what you've been able to build. And
Mm.
here comes along Joseph Prince saying, no, actually, all you need is the love of Jesus and the grace.
Mm.
And I can pull out several other leaders, but we don't have time today on the planet where God has called a specific person to minister to what's going on. So
Mm-hmm.
he's gone, this is this person, and that person has got what I need to do that. It was similar. I knew when you came to college, you came because he knew there was a cranky little Australian woman down there that he could use her ministry to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense? You
Yeah.
could have gone to 13 different colleges,
Yeah, that's right.
and oftentimes the students that landed in Sydney were the ones that were coming for to meet Cam McDonald or to meet Lee Burns or to meet Angela Backley, because whatever it is that they had, it was something that he needed imparted onto you.
Mm-hmm.
And given that we are all Christ's hands and feet, we are acting in agency with what the person needs. And this is this psychology, sociology thing again, is understanding that whilst we are a big global world, we are dealing with the creator of the universe, where it is a move of the hand to have a young man come from Canada to
Mm-hmm.
study in Sydney because of specific things that he needs to learn.
Yeah, right.
So it
Mm.
is understanding that micro and macro and
Mm.
how that is so important. And when we are actually flowing strongly in our giftings and what we've been called to do, that is really where it doesn't tax us personally. You
Hmm.
can do kids ministry, no doubt, but what cost that will have on your body and on your
Wow.
mind is what I'm talking about. Because
Wow.
is that what you're anointed for?
Hmm. Wow.
No doubt you can do it, but is it good?
Mm. That feels like that's a big responsibility, right? As leaders and you
Well,
know.
no is a viable option.
That's right. That is.
And I
Yes.
think it's, Pastor, I'm going to say no to you, and these are the reasons why I'm going to say
Yes.
no to you.
Yes.
It's it's having that understanding, or taking God, if you like, at face value, that you are indeed Son of the Most High God.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You are the expert in self, and you are letting the pastor know that this is why I'm going to say no to you.
Mm. Yeah.
I think you back yourself.
Mm.
You're getting yourself out on a skinny branch in church culture. I understand what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
but nothing ventured, nothing gained. And this is what I'm talking about, being
Love that.
gutsy.
I love that.
Being that person where you are going, look, most of the time I'm totally malleable. I'm a team player. I'm with you, but there's going to be certain points where I'm going to say, yeah, no, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. You're a fierce defender of people, and I think
Well,
that's
I
awesome.
think God was quite deliberate in what he saw in you.
Yeah.
I take God at face value. This is what he wanted.
Mm.
Um, and I try to be her as fiercely as I can.
Mm.
Not everyone's cup of tea, but I, I, I focus on the fact that this is what he wanted. Have I
Mm.
any doubt that God has the ability to correct me if I'm out of line? None whatsoever. The Lord knows I have experienced his correction. So if I wake up in the morning and I love God, it is much harder to harm him or harm other people. And I
Yeah.
also know that if he needs to speak to his daughter about her mouth, usually, he will.
That's awesome. Um, I got a question for you. Um, And I think this is from maybe a DM we had like a while back, and I posted something about success, and then you asked me the question, well, what do you think success is? And I'm still been thinking about that, right? As a Christian, what does it mean to be successful?
It gets back to two sides of successful. There's the who and the do.
Mm-hmm.
So the who successful is your ability when you do a review or an audit on life, can you readily see the fruits of the Spirit? The fruits of the Spirit to me are the measuring stick of how you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense, I think
Yes.
that's fairly easy.
Mm-hmm.
Success, when you're talking about your ministry, whether that's in your secular work or whether that's in your vocation, I think is about where you run risk is when you allow other people to define your success. I remember a minister saying to me, I don't understand how you do your ministry. It's so one at a time, because I would meet people one at a time for usually about an hour. And this
Mm-hmm.
frustrated this minister. And I said to this minister, I will have my stadium. I will just have it one person at a time.
Wow.
So I spoke to them in the language of what they were saying. They were talking about it was only relevant, it was only significant if there was a lot of people hearing it, seeing it, absorbing it, being it. And it's simply not true.
Mm-hmm.
One of the more successful churches in Korea, and I talk superficially, obviously, because I don't attend that church, is that it always had the power of seven. So knowing that if I discipled one, they would influence another seven, who would influence another seven, who would influence. So it was always about understanding that God can take your small amount
Mm-hmm.
and turn it into very big things with the ripple effect. I think
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to you in college about, the scene from Pocahontas when the willow tree puts her frond into the water, and what we
Mm-hmm.
see is this ripple effect of the water from one small frond dip.
Mm-hmm.
And I think success is so hard for us to gauge because we rely upon the Spirit of God to take our little bit. Broken little
Mm-hmm.
girl from Blacktown voted most likely to fail,
Mm-hmm.
to take her little bit and turn it into something supernatural. Supernatural is not our gig. So
Mm-hmm.
I think significance is always about understanding that it is in the rock star moments that we rarely find significance. It is from my perspective, it is about when one person sees another person and values them and is there in the moment being present. I think that's successful.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that would argue with me. And I think, you may be a banker in order to earn the money to look after your family. I get that. But in that, are you an ethical banker? Do
Right.
you help your staff? Do you understand what I'm saying? So you
Mm-hmm.
may have a job that is not seen as desirable. You dig ditches, but when you're eating your lunch, do you talk to your team members? Do you know about how their wife's pregnancy is going? Do you relate
Mm-hmm.
to them? Do you value them? And
Mm-hmm.
allow them to value you in return. That's where the success and the significance comes from, not digging ditches.
Wow, that's brilliant. I got one last question for you. This is a big question
Sure.
that I've been meaning to ask you because I think a lot of people think about it. What's the, for you, what's the balance between someone embracing the stretch, but yet also keeping the boundaries, right? Like when is the stretch too much, right? Because I think there is, we've been taught a lot about, taking the stretch, embracing the God stretch, but how do we know when the stretch is a bit too much and it's time to actually say no to a couple things?
I think it's about, once again, the person is the expert in themselves, allowing each person to define their own stretch.
Hmm.
There have been students over the years, and you'll know the ones, that can run for 3 years on the smell of an oily rag. They just don't stop. And as an introvert and a quieter person, I think, I don't get it. But because they move at such a pace, they're allowed to define the speed for everyone. And I just don't think that works. It's once again with your team, if you know your team well, you'll know who you can call upon for that extra bit and who you can't necessarily. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I always kept my diary at about 80% capacity, so that if the principal or the EVP, or because quite often staff would be having problems that they would like to chat through and just have a sounding board, a safe sounding board. So I would want to be available for those things. So I always held my diary to about 80% to make sure that I didn't overload myself. The other thing that I did was always make sure that all of my family, so my husband and I will sit down once a week and we'll exchange diaries. So each of us knew what was going on in each other's world. I would also know what was going on in my kids' world. So at any time, if someone asked me something, I could look at my world and go, okay, I can do that, or that's not the best way for me to spend my time this week. Because one of the things that I learned very early on in ministry, and I'm so grateful for this, you know how you go to those 3-day courses and you get one line? This was that line. Every time you say yes to somebody else, you say no to your husband.
Oh, wow.
And that was a life changer for me, because I don't want to get to Judgment Day and God to go, hey, great ministry, well done, chick, but what happened to your husband and family? What happened there? So it's looking at your life as a balanced offering to the Lord, rather than it all being out of joint and not about. I am called equally to steward my family as I am my ministry. It's not about one or the other.
Wow.
And one isn't more important than the other. But it's being organised, it's knowing yourself, and learning other things other than no. Let me get back to you on that. Now, in most church circles, if you say, let me get back to you on that, and you do, even if it's a half a day later, they've already gone on and found someone else that will do it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I haven't said no. This is not a word most church circles like. So learning how to say it in a different way.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know whether any of that helps.
No. It's brilliant, because I think one thing that I've just been noticing for this entire time is just the importance that you're advocating for someone to really know themselves and advocate for yourself heavily and know exactly where you are. Yes, that's right. And as you're coming to make your contribution to the church or whichever space you find yourself in, just advocating for yourself and fiercely defending yourself and your family. Practically, how have you gone about, and how do you encourage people to get to know themselves more, right? Because I think sometimes we can just fit in so quickly that we rarely take the time to self-reflect and see what's actually going on in our inside world. How do you suggest people discover
comparison? Comparison will steal your joy immediately. Comparison will steal your joy. You were made who you are. You aren't anybody else. You're who God wanted. So comparison will steal your joy. And it's really knowing that, as the Bible talks about, it's a journey. And who I was as a 30-year-old chaplain versus who I am now, I have a different capacity, a different knowledge. I have more experience. So it's understanding that the 30-year-old is operating at best practice, but it's not going to be what you're going to be at 40 or 50. So allowing that unpacking. I remember having a conversation with you when you wanted to get more of God. You wanted to get more of the Son understanding of God. And I said to you, buddy, until you have a woman that holds you in her arms and looks in your eyes and you know that you are the center of her world, it will be difficult for you to understand how God feels. And buddy, until you hold your first child in your arms and you watch its eyelashes grow, it is difficult for you to understand what it's like to be the Father in heaven when he looks at you. Yeah, wow. So it's understanding that your knowledge, your your capacity to be able to really understand, it changes in life seasons and grows and becomes richer. And not trying to have everything now.
Yeah, wow.
Not beating up a 25-year-old because they don't have, the theology of a 50-year-old. They've had 25 more years to develop life experience and theology than you've had. Understand it is age appropriate, and that's okay.
Yeah. Wow. That's
I
brilliant.
hope that helps.
No, that's brilliant. Susan, thank you so much. Appreciate
Oh,
you.
pleasure.
It was encouraging to me listening to you. I've got a lot of good takeaways, and I think
Good.
especially just the courage to keep on being yourself and being exactly how God uniquely made us, and not trying to be someone else, and embracing our unique story and bringing that to the table to help and serve people.
Yep. No one should have to beg to be loved, bud.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm.
Appreciate it.
All right.
All right.
I'll see
Thank
you
you,
later.
everyone who was watching. We so appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. If you're looking for more stories that'll inspire you to step out into the call of God in your life, why don't you check out this podcast right here?